Welcome, everyone, to this interview with Joshua Cameron. I had the pleasure of participating in a summit that he created recently with a lot of other really top-notch speakers and energy healers and philosophers and individuals who are going deep into the mechanics of how we use consciousness to heal, essentially. And I really liked working with Joshua, so I wanted to bring him on the channel so you guys could get a chance to meet him and enjoy his level, his depth of understanding and experience. So Joshua, let's just dive right in.
Let's
I'm
do.
really excited. Yeah, I'm really excited to be here with you and to have this interview. Could you start by telling us a little bit about how you found yourself in this field?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And I appreciate you holding the space. I really enjoyed working with you as well. Our interview was, I really quite enjoyed it. Now, I'd say, well, there's a lot to my story, and so it might be more meaningful to kind of Quentin Tarantino it and go a little bit back in time
Sure,
and
sure.
forward in time. But I started to realize how I could step into my own, I guess, majesty, if you will, when I was in the army.
Mm.
Part of what got me to join the army, though, was that I had learned to not listen to myself because I wouldn't have been in the army in the first place, right? I didn't really like authority. I've got a lot of very magician energy, and magicians don't like to be cornered. They don't like to be yelled at and told what to do.
Right.
And if you're familiar with the Jungian archetypes. So, anyways, in the army, and 8 days before I was supposed to deploy to my first war zone, right? So we had 6 months, uh, orders for 6 months, knowing that we were going to deploy. Well, 8 days before that, September 11th happened, and that was a crazy time. And for those 8 days, we had CNN, right? Because what's wrong with having constant negative news playing for 8 days, repeating the same horror over and
Over and
over and
over.
over again, and it made me feel trapped. It made me feel scared. I didn't
Sure.
know that there's already uncertainty going to a war zone. And now
Right.
this is like, oh my God, what's going on? And then now, and I didn't really know much about, Muslim religion. I guess I still don't really know a whole lot. But we're going to a Muslim country, and then here's the news basically telling me, hey, you should probably not like these Muslims, right? Because this one guy who we've now come to find out has been working with the U.S. government for a long time. In fact, he was a freedom fighter with the Mujahideen, right, to help run Russia out of town in Afghanistan long before. But anyway, and what's interesting about those feelings of trapped and scared and alone and not really sure what to do, well, it reminded me a lot of my childhood, where I experienced a lot of trauma, a lot of physical and emotional abuse,
Mhm.
and I've come to find now that when we are in stressful times, we will revert back to that scared kid.
Oh, sure.
And
Absolutely.
well, then the pandemic happened, and then the pandemic is like, well, the same
Fast
thing.
forward to
Fast forward, yeah,
2020.
yeah, and the pandemic happened. It's just like, what is going on, right? So for years, I've been working in pediatric medical research,
Oh,
and in the largest longitudinal study in the country, which was the National Children's Study, but later became the Utah Children's Project, and then became ECHO, which was Environmental Influences and Child Health Outcomes. And it was a whole lot of fun. I really enjoyed it. I felt like it brought me to life. And then I started doing data analytics. And what's so fascinating
oh,
about
data
the
analytics.
wisdom, yeah, what's fascinating about the wisdom of the universe, though, is that we don't always see the gift that we're getting. And what I learned in data analytics was this idea that anytime that you're looking at large data sets, you need to be able to quiet the noise to
Mm,
increase the signal. Well,
That's so
I mean,
brilliant. Yes.
well, not just that, but is there anything different with that than spirituality?
Right. Right.
Yeah,
Exactly.
because often we walk around with all these thoughts in our heads that other people told us, right? And we often don't even inspect those to see if we believe what they even say, if there's any truth to it. We just assume that it's right. And, we often also mistake advice, or rather opinion, for advice.
Mhm.
And what I mean by that is that people who we like, who we respect in our lives, who have, no experience in any particular field in which we're inquiring, since we
Mhm.
respect them, we'll say, hey, I love your advice, when we should say, I'd love your opinion. And when they give us
Yes.
their opinion, that's not based on any sort of, grounding in, experience within that field,
Well,
we'll just assume
certainly
that they
not
know what they're
based in
talking about.
your personal experience, right? They're
Yes.
giving you the opinion based on their experience, which has to be taken, into
Yeah.
perspective. Yeah.
Well, and then, or even like whether it be a career decision or a
Right.
spiritual decision, if they're not in that space,
Right.
so the difference between advice and opinion is advice is given to you by somebody who's at a place where you would like to be, right? So
Hmm.
you already know that they're able to get there and
Right.
they're able to tell you in a meaningful way that can help you actually get there. An
Yes.
opinion is everything else.
Right. Right.
And
Beautiful.
so,
Beautiful.
yeah, so it really helped me quiet the noise to increase the signal. And what I didn't realize is that it was a great way for my heart to really start opening up much more. So for so long, I was so deep in philosophy, helping, mentor, friends around me, younger people. I'd even done ketamine therapy, years before this as well, which I think, did a whole lot in really starting to help me with my spiritual path.
Great.
But when it really kickstarted for me was I was listening to Jordan Peterson secularize the Bible, during the pandemic, didn't know what to do. And he starts talking about the Genesis from a way of, well, look at how wise this is, not because you're supposed to take it literally, but because of the figurative value, because this is just oral traditions that's now been able to get written down. And as soon as he said that, a light bulb went off in my head. I'm like, oh, that makes a whole lot of sense. And
Yeah.
then more than that, I asked myself, well, is there room for God in my life? But not God that somebody else gave me, right? Not
Right.
God of the Catholic Church or God that a priest gave me or a pastor gave me or my parents gave me or my best friend gave me, right? God that Joshua Cameron's okay with. And my answer to that was eventually, after following this path, because I had a vision pumped in my head that said I need to be speaking from a podium. Like, well, at this point, I didn't know if I was an atheist or an agnostic. And like, so I was just supposed to walk up into a church here in Utah and be like, "Hey, by the way, I got a vision, from heaven. I'm supposed to
The
speak to y'all."
Mormons. Right.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting about the Mormons though is that every first Sunday of every month they have what's called their fast and testimonial meeting, which
Oh,
means that anyone who shows up can go up and speak for
oh,
a couple
that's
of days.
great. I didn't know that. Have you
Nor did
spoken?
I.
Have you ever
Nor
spoken there?
now, yeah, many times. And in fact, Jordan had recommended to create the highest ideal of goodness which you can conceive, and then make yourself worthy of it by becoming it.
Beautiful.
And
Yes, I'm so familiar with his work. Yes.
yeah,
He
and so
came out
I've had
just in the nick of time to be able to step into the quiet that the pandemic created, because it kind of caused the whole world to kind of shut down and be
yeah,
quiet. And then his voice was right there, and it just
yeah.
inspired so many people. Yeah.
Well, and and his pain and his suffering that he went through in order to still bring that message. Well,
Yep.
and so, like I said, I've been studying, philosophy since I was a teenager. So I had a lot of spirituality without looking at it as spirituality.
Mm-hmm.
And this was the missing link. And this is what put
Mm.
everything together. And so
Nice.
by the third time of me speaking, at the Mormon church and sharing my beliefs, well, I started creating these editorialized versions of my testimony. So I've got
Yes.
several letters to the editor and opinion editorials published here in the two largest newspapers in Utah. And so
Nice.
that's kind of a format that I'm very familiar with. And so my highest ideal of goodness was Gandalf, but
Right.
not Gandalf who went to the mines of Moria and fought the Balrog that he didn't want to face in the first place. In fact, he didn't want to go to the mines of Moria in the first place.
Right.
Or the Gandalf who got, frightened by the Witch King because he didn't want to face off with him either. But the Gandalf who saved the world by seeing the value that nobody else could, right? Because everyone looks to, they looked at the hobbits and like, look at these hobbits. Well, they're not building grand armies. They're not
Right.
building castles in the sky,
They're
right?
little
They're not.
guys.
Yeah, yeah. They're little. But what did they have? Well, they had more love and love of community than anyone else, and that's actually what
Mm.
inoculated them against the greatest evil that
Mm.
Middle Earth had never known. And without that, the world would have burned. So
Yeah.
Gandalf saw something that nobody else could,
Yes.
and that's who I decided is not only my highest ideal of goodness, but who I wanted to become. And
Beautiful.
it, 6 months later, I met my mentor. Never heard of him in my life, and all of a sudden, poof! Right, because when the student is ready, right, the master will appear.
Right. Right. Exactly. Beautiful. And so, can you share a little bit about with everyone about that meeting, or
Sure.
uh,
Well,
what you got from that?
so I saw a YouTube ad, and here's this British chap by the name of Peter Sage, who is using these quotes, philosophical quotes that I'm using. Well, wait a minute, I've been using these quotes for years. Why does this guy basically sound like he's talking to me? Well, that's strange. And so I didn't quite put this together that I had summoned him into my life, or
Mm.
manifested him into my life. And so I joined his elite mentorship forum, which is an incredible 6-month journey where you've got a peer group as well. So I had 100 people I was going through this with, but then you
Nice.
also have an accountability buddy. And so that way, it's
Nice.
not just that you're going through something at your own pace, and then hopefully it sinks in, but you're going through it. You then have each week there's a meeting. I joined specifically with Peter Sage rather than a trainer. And so, every other week I'd meet up with Peter Sage and he'd answer all of our questions. The other
Nice.
weeks we'd have a community meeting where we would just share our thoughts and our feelings and our own growth. And
Nice.
then, one time each week, we'd meet with our accountability buddy just to make sure that we're actually, picking up and living these values that we're learning from, how we can actually influence reality, through neuroscience, through mysticism, through physics, right? And a mentor who taught Peter was actually Tom Campbell, who was one of the founding scientists of the Monroe Institute, who taught the CIA. And so this is absolutely based in science. And I don't know if you've seen the CIA Gateway document. I'm not a
No,
big
I didn't
fan of
see
the CIA, in that they do so many covert, just kind of dark things that don't really resonate with me.
it. Right.
But the fact that they're using this mysticism, well, it reminds me a lot of the Tao, where the Tao is not really interested in morality and what we call, there's a rule set. If you learn how to tap into the rule set, well, then you can use the rule set to your benefit.
Right.
You might have to deal with karma, right? That's a different
Right.
thing, based upon on your actions. So now he's given me all this stuff from my left brain to be like, oh, okay, well, this is safe. This is safe for me to actually, intellectualize and incorporate into my philosophy and take it up a notch. And Carl Jung had this idea that the lower the hell, the higher the heaven. But
Right.
more than that, almost like a slingshot, as you're pulling it back into that lower hell, when you let go, well, when you pull a slingshot back, as far as it will go, and then you let go, it's going to launch a whole lot further and faster than if you just barely pull on it at all.
Right.
And
Right.
I
So
found
the
that,
art is in the aim,
yes,
right?
yes.
Yes.
Well, and many people get caught up in, well, Dorothy, I'd also be successful but you don't know what the life I've lived.
Right.
Dorothy, I'd also be happy, but you don't know the life I've lived. But if you can let go of that and let go of just that garbage that's holding you back, that you're holding on to, that does not serve you, the negative emotions, when you do, it can immediately launch you to new areas.
Right.
And I eventually started, well, and it wasn't long, 2-3 months until I met the spiritual master who taught me how to heal. And this guy, first was the most bizarre guy I've ever heard of. Like I've never, I went in because he's teaching people how to speed read. And I was like, wow, okay, awesome. This would change my life fundamentally, man. I got some thick philosophy books. I could really speed read at lunch. And
Great.
yeah, well, and then, so he's talking to us about speed reading, and then just out of the blue, he's like, and then there's 13 evil families that control the world. I was like, what just happened? What? And then he starts talking about reptilians and interdimensional demons. Like, oh my God, what's going on here? And I'm staring at my mentor, just like, react, react, and let me know that this is crazy. But he had a smirk on his face, like he's heard it all before. Oh, it's just Ed. That's just Ed Stracher. That's just what Ed Stracher says. But that's what really helped me understand. Okay, I don't know what to make of this. This is so bizarre for me, and it's so outside of my own comfort area of what I can believe,
Mm-hmm.
that instead of deciding I do or don't believe, I'm going to suspend that in a holding pattern and
Right.
just investigate it. And so I'm going to be skeptical, but I'm also going to investigate, right? Because I don't want to be dogmatic.
Right.
And by doing that, and I eventually started working with him. And the most fascinating thing. So here again, I mean, for so long I was an atheist, agnostic. I didn't really even believe in spiritual healing. He blew my mind that this was a real space. And within, he gave us some materials to go through to be able to heal ourselves before we actually started working with him.
Mm-hmm. Good.
But once I started working with him, an hour in to working with him, he's like, all right, who wants to heal somebody? Like, what? Well, I do, kind of afraid, but I do. Well, so he put me up with a lady who didn't even have her camera on, right? So it was a Zoom meeting, so it's all remote, much like you do, I assume. Um, and so I couldn't tell if she's being compliant, other than just intuiting. I couldn't see, and most people are sitting up, at the camera. She said that she's lying down. So again, I'm brand new at this. I'm as green as they come, and so already there's non-compliance. I'm like, okay, well, I guess I'll just go with it. And so she had libido issues and really wanted help with her libido. I took her through a micro meditation and connected her to the spiritual energies that I do. And within just 7 minutes after speaking to her, she said that she could literally feel something flicking her ovaries, as if her ovaries were stuck and something was kickstarting them back into actions. And then again, there's my left brain saying, oh my God, not only was this real for you, Joshua, because you've been able to feel it healing yourself,
Right.
but now you can actually do it for somebody else through Zoom, across states, across time and space. And
Yes.
that blew my mind. And yeah, I've never gone back.
That's wonderful. Beautiful. Yeah, I'm maybe where you were before you started that. Like I'm skeptical. I'm skeptical of certain sort of deep conspiracy theory types of things. I mean, I know that most conspiracy theories are actually fact.
Yeah.
After 6 months is about the difference between a conspiracy theory and fact these days. So, right. So, like, that part of me is like, I'm always willing to remain some degree of openness and willing to look. But yeah, I mean, there's certain things that I think it's because I feel that one of the mechanisms that we're working with, because obviously what you've gained or accrued through your work is how to use your consciousness and your awareness to influence and affect the way your world shows up to you and how you manifest reality and so like that. And so I feel that one of the principles in there is that the consciousness of the observer influences or affects the observation. And so one of the ways we can define the darker elements of creation is we can animate them. We can give them names, and we can think of them as sometimes dark, subtle beings or something like that. There's different ways of sort of defining and looking at those energies. But from my perspective, from the Vedic perspective, there's a level of all of us that is not separate from anything. So the deepest darkness that can be defined in whatever way people choose to define it, that deepest darkness can also be recognized as a facet or aspect of oneself. And from that position, one is in an autonomous, is kind of like gains the autonomy to have an influence upon it, as the awareness then, when it falls upon something, it changes it or it affects it in a specific way. And so, that's, I mean, I'm just kind of throwing this out here, this idea, right? That this is kind of like a fundamental principle in how we use our awareness or consciousness to affect change in the environment. And yeah, anyway, I'm not going to say yay or nay on the theories about the evil families or the lizard people or whatever, all that stuff. I mean, it's not really an area that in my work, I don't tend to go and delve into that much at all. And there's still a part of me, like the jury's still out. This is just me. There's the jury's still out a little bit on these things, but partly because whenever the awareness goes in to like look, it finds the self. It finds the self. It finds oneself, and it finds aspects or structures of self that have somehow gotten separated from wholeness. And the transformation of the material or even subtle material world back home, bringing it all back home, returning it to the light of divinity and the light of being seems to be one of the simple ways or the sort of fundamental movements that consciousness will make in order to essentially, it's gone off into that I'm separate from the creation and it's all, and God is somewhere, but I don't believe. Jordan Peterson has beautiful, interesting things to say about this, how people set themselves up to be the judge of God and they blame God for that kind of thing, and then to bring it back to, oh yes, but it's really just myself. It's myself. Anyway, I guess I'm I'm just kind of responding to what you said.
No, I like that. Well, and the
But
thing is,
but yeah, I didn't
oh,
mean
go
to
ahead.
bypass the value of what an incredibly transformative experience it was for you to be with your teacher. Anyway, you go ahead. Tell me.
Well, nobody knows the truth of the capital T, and
Right.
that's just how it is. And so
Right.
the best thing we can do for ourselves is to create maps or models of the world that serve us.
Yes.
And because I don't normally share what I just shared. Like if I'm talking to a client, I don't say, by the way, there's 13 evil families that rule the
Right.
world, right?
And I'm sure your teacher doesn't either. He was just
Oh, he
feeling really
does. Oh, he
safe with,
does.
oh,
Oh,
he
he
does.
he will
Okay.
gobs because he only wants to deal with people that are going to believe that what he calls the highest truth. And so what I've done is I've tried to turn it into a map that doesn't gobsmack people so much. And
Right.
the map that I've created is, well, there's truth to it in all aspects, in that everything's flow, right? And I'm a big fan of the
Right.
Tao Te Ching,
Yes.
and all energy needs to flow. And if water isn't flowing, well, then it starts to stagnate. And what's
Right.
attracted to stagnating water? Well, mosquitoes, parasites, bacteria, viruses. Well, if our bodies aren't flowing, and the energy which governs our body, our soul, right? Our soul is the superset, our minds and body are the subset. And if the energy that of our soul is not flowing, well, then what happens? Well, it starts to stagnate. Well, what's
Right.
attracted to stagnating energy? Well, now you have the energetic parasites, the energetic mosquitoes,
Mm.
energetic, bacteria and viruses. And, in the same way that GPS isn't the roads that I'm actually driving on, it's a
Right.
meaningful, representation of the roads that I'm driving on. Well, I found that
Right.
this map is a way for people to really wrap their minds around this idea. um, because Hermetic philosophy talks about how, as above, so below, as below, so above. And so I see a lot of truth there. And, we may, and we can really see, evidence of, we talked about, politics a little bit, in the green room before we started recording. And there's a great way to see, well, we know that there's bacteria and viruses of the body. Is there a meaningful way to see, viruses of the mind? Well, yeah, especially as an American. Walk into any
Sure.
crowded room, and it's even more fun. Well, interesting, I shouldn't say fun, but interesting if the people there like each other, and then say one of three names. Don't say anything else. Just say the name and watch the cacophony erupt. Say Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, or Donald Trump. And immediately people are like, and they're like taken over by an agent of the Matrix,
Right.
which, and, my master might, use, language like demons. I might say mosquitoes, right? He might say people are cursed. I might say, well, there's a virus, or there's a bacteria, or there's some fungus, right? Because it's easier for the left brain to accept, and doesn't just smack them in the face and they're left shocked the same way that I was like,
Right. Right.
what?
Right. Right. Right.
And so I want to make sure that if we have a model of the world, that it actually serves us and it helps us actually get to our destination the same way GPS
Yes.
does.
Yes. There's a saying from the Vedas, the truth is one, the wise know it by many names.
Hmm.
And the thing about the truth, like with a capital T, like the big truth, is that it's so big that the normal tools that we use to discern truth, analysis and synthesis and subjective analysis and objective analysis and so forth, all those tools, the intellect, all these tools, they're not really big enough to wrap themselves thoroughly around the truth with a big
Hmm.
capital T, because the truth with a big capital T incorporates and includes all the laws of nature. And there's so many laws of nature that they literally cancel each other out. Ultimately, if you get all the laws of nature in one room together, what you find is that for every law that says this, there's an opposite one that says the opposite. And so ultimately, the truth is nothing. It's no experience. It's kind of like the non-dual type of concept
Hmm.
of absolute unbounded quality, less eternal nothingness in a way, but also is presence of being amness, we could also say. And because of that, it's not possible to know it, it's only possible to directly experience it. And so that does make it really difficult in this field, in the field of energy healing, because that truth with a capital T is the foundation for the whole transformative process that occurs when a person heals. And so you're right that I think you're very wise to create a map, and a map that comes to people in a language of the times that is really accessible to people, because somehow everybody who wants to heal and who cares enough to, and who has that vision that they could use their conscious, they realize, most people who are sick, they realize it's the sickness came from some imbalance that started inside. It started with some kind of energetic virus or parasite or imbalance of some kind. And so intuitively, at least they know that. And so the realization is there that you also need consciousness to get out of it. And so the question is, how do you exercise consciousness to eliminate those imbalances? So could you share with us a little bit about your practice and how you help people to do that?
Yeah, sure, I'd be happy to. And just like I said, when the soul is a superset, and if everything downstream of the soul is governed by the soul, what does a mosquito, what are these ticks, what do these parasites do? Well, they drain our lifeblood. Well, then these energetic, spiritual, viruses and parasites, well, they're going to drain the life force. The life force is being drained. Well, then the body and the mind will break down as a natural consequence. Sure. And so it's a matter of, what I do is I connect people through, my master showed me how to connect with the deepest levels of truth. This is things that secret societies have known for a long time. Because again, these are rules. We're not interested in human morality. They're, karma can take care of that. Right. And, can show people the lessons that they need to learn. Sure. And so if we know how to tap into the rules, well, then what we can do is we can remove those parasites, those mosquitoes. But more than that, right, the stagnant energy that was there, that was the breeding ground for them. When you invite flow, well, you put you put a dirty drop of water in the ocean. Well, now it's clean by the ocean. And it's the same principle there. And so by inviting flow there, well, then it's, and I even had a healing circle as part of a VIP event in the Cancel Chronic Pain that you were part of. And there was a lady who I got a wonderful testimonial from her. She was in Germany, and this is only one day. So she showed up, and I asked people just what they felt. I didn't prime them for, hey, did you feel this? Did you feel that? Right? Did you feel the energy? I just, hey, what did you feel? Well, she said that she's been dealing with a lot of hip pain, and she had this visual of like the dry chaff, the useless part of wheat, or even just dried weeds. She just saw them just like materializing, just going away, just like it left her body, like that deadness was inside of her, creating a block. She her own words were that she felt that a block was removed. Nice. Yeah. And what's interesting is that after that, well, she's had these synchronicities in her life, so and now with these synchronicities and with just that one healing event, and this was just a few days ago, she's been on narcotics and pain meds every day of her life, and now she's finally got to the point where she's been able to go multiple days without pain, without these pain pills. And I asked her, when was the last time that you went even 3 days without a pill? She said, I don't know. I at least 4 years. Wow. And that's one of the wonderful things about this is that it can happen literally in real time. And, it's not something that needs to take years and years, like somebody going to psychotherapy, been going for 15 years, and now their vernacular or their vocabulary is outstanding and be able to describe, right, the turmoil that they're in, but they're not really any closer. But they're still in the turmoil. Yeah. Right. Yeah. No, I get it. Beautiful. So when you say that they're laws, I'm thinking because as I mentioned, I may have mentioned earlier that there is no standard in our industry. No. Oh, that was an agreement. There's no standard in our industry, right? So a lot of the terms that we use vary from healer to healer and so forth. But there is this Vedic principle that refers to what we think of as the laws of nature, and that there are
these set influences that are basically universal influences. They kind of stand independent outside of the autonomy of human nature, in a sense, in that the laws of nature exist with or without humanity. And before even there was an earth, these laws of nature existed. So they're kind of like these sort of large universal structures of order, essentially. And that obviously they gave rise to the creation of humanity. And like karma, they give rise to all the types of experiences that we have. You do something, then there's a response from the environment. And so I'd like to maybe dig a little more deeply into that part about the laws, and how you experience them, and how you draw them forth to support healing for people. Is that too?
That's a wonderful question. Like, I mean, how could you not ask that question? I don't know that I can necessarily answer it in a way that'll suffice the left brain, and make the left brain happy. The thing is part of the laws is understanding that I've got a good way of looking at the world in the same way that Dolores Cannon. You ever heard of Dolores Cannon?
Yes.
So she talks about, where we all come from and where our souls come from is, imagine this great giant amalgam of light, and little tiny flecks of that light break off, and that's basically our soul. And so we are part of the all, right? Part of God. Well, my brain is so convinced of its magnificence, and it's so convinced of its brilliance, but I know that that's the noise. I know that's the noise. And when I quiet the noise and I tune into my heart, well, through my heart connection, I can tap into my soul. Now, I don't need to know in order to do.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. It's the same.
Yeah.
Because I've definitely noticed that, like, the nervous system, it exists all over the body, and there's a kind of a neural network around the whole heart area, just like there's a big neural network in the gut,
Yep.
And the way we experience and process, the way we understand our experience here in the heart center is different from the way we understand our experience in the head area. And that makes a lot of sense, that what one is essentially doing is coming into a space of direct presence with that light. And it's interesting, you said that if you think about how great God is, that you realize that's just part of the noise, because that's more like an extension of a sort of belief system or something that's like a belief. But that the principle is that one gets into that direct experience of it. I'm going to throw something out here, which is that my experience of the laws of nature is that there's kind of a hierarchy in a way. There's certain tendencies for specific laws to dominate at different times. Like in this moment, in this very second, you and I are meeting in the context of this interview. And so there's certain laws of nature that are dominating, that are allowing and supporting that to happen in this way, which won't be, 3 hours from now, we'll be doing something else, or an hour ago, we were doing something else. So, at any moment, at any given moment, there are only certain laws of nature that are going to, at least that we're going to experience as human beings with our lovely nervous systems that experience the reality in a sequential unfoldment of moments. Okay. And that in that hierarchy of expression of natural law, it's my experience in the energy healing field that a lot of energy healers think of the law of love as like a fundamental, is like the first law. But I don't, I've looked again, and I don't see it that way. My experience is the law of evolution is the first law. Going even back to the Big Bang, what would cause the singularity that was folded in on its own nature to come forth and express itself as the whole universe is an intention to evolve, more so even than an intention to love. Not that love isn't part of that dynamic, because love softens it and makes it doable. It makes it not so harsh. But time after time, as because I've been also in this field for some time, people come to me, and the challenge is based on the fact that that the creation was moving them to evolve primarily, and that created a context that wasn't very comfortable, where they didn't feel very loved or very coddled, or or it wasn't easy. But the evolutionary value seems to always consistently be there in every experience, whether it's a positive or a negative, can be kind of viewed through the lens of evolution. I guess that's the point. But not every experience can be viewed through the lens of love. I mean, they're obviously
Okay,
right.
so I love that a lot. And so there's four basic human needs, and then there's two needs of the soul's language. And so the four basic human needs are the need for certainty, right? I need to know that if I walk into my house, I'm not going to fall into a hole in the ground, that my roof isn't going to collapse on me, that I'm going to be able to feed myself. The need for uncertainty, which is variety. I can't just eat the same meal every day. I can't just go to the same places every day or watch the same things every day. I've got to have some sort of variety. Well, then there's the need for love and connection, and the need for significance. And both of these are the opposites, right? Opposites are the exact same, just a difference of degree. Again, Hermetic philosophy. So the need for significance, by being significant, already distances one from love and connection. And so there's a balance there. Well, when your point to evolution, well, the soul speaks in terms of the needs for growth and contribution. Well, what's evolution if not growth and contribution? Because the second an animal is no longer growing or contributing, it's taken out of the food chain. And I think love, you're right. Love is a fundamental principle of that. And I think it's a powerful principle of that. But to say that love is the only source of power just is to be very naive, right? How do we explain the Hitlers, the Stalins, the Maos? I mean, were they just magic themselves into power? And if so, well, where did that magic come from to be able to magic that power if love is the only source of power? Because they certainly seem devoid of love. And again, this is what I mean by the rule sets. If you know how to contribute, right? They were certainly contributing in a way that I don't agree with, but they were still contributing. And they were growing in a way in which I certainly don't agree with, but they were still growing. And
I mean, they were creating context for people's evolution to happen really, really, really fast and in a really, really uncomfortable way.
Yes.
Paying off big karmas. It was rough.
Well, and most people, their awakening is an unpleasant one, right? Because if, the human body wants to feel comfortable. The human body isn't all that concerned with growth and contribution. The soul is. And that's why the path of the soul, the best way to open up to the soul is through love. But there's other things, there's other awarenesses that are more than happy to be placeholders for that, right? I'm pretty sure that, Hitler, being that he shot himself, right, when he was about to get captured, he probably didn't have a very good relationship with his soul. So he probably found, whether it's mosquitoes, whether it's parasites, something other to help inform him that understood how to pull these strings of power. And so it is a bit naive to say that love is the only thing. And I find, something that I don't necessarily agree with, that I find a lot of people in, yoga studios or healing spaces will say like, "Oh, Dorothy, I killed my ego. Oh, so great. My ego's dead." It's like, really, is that what we're supposed to do? We're supposed to chop off our
We're
supposed to chop off our arm and say, "Hey, you know what? Now I'm whole." I'm gonna slice my brain in half and be like, "All right, I'm whole now. I got rid of that. Got rid of that darned ego." Like the ego is there to trap us, and if we can escape the trap, well, that's when we've started to reach into our power. And so the ego is part of the matrix that controls everyone.
Yes. Yeah. I've even had clients, people, not necessarily clients, but teachers that I've run into who don't use their name anymore or anything. Don't call me that because I just am. I've let go. I don't even have a name anymore. And I'm just like, what? I bet you get up in the morning and use the potty.
Yeah.
Anyway, but part of the issue here, I think, though, also is a sort of how we define the ego. From the context that I have as my background, which is Vedic, the ego is actually the sense of self. It's a sense of who one is. And my experience is that as long as the field of oneself is integrated with the direct experience of the source of creation, then the definition of sense of self is this is wholeness showing up as a human in a human existence, in a human life. And I am human and I am divine and they're married. And this is the wholeness is my individuality and my cosmic universal reality together as one. And that the moment that the sense of self feels and experiences itself overwhelmed by the force of all that resource from the source of creation, all that uncountable amount of energy that comes from the source of creation, the overwhelm causes the individual form to comes in physically. It's in the physical form. It's like overwhelmed, too much. And then it causes the individual to feel separate. Well, I'm separate from the source of creation. And that's where the mosquitoes and parasites come in, because they function based on the concept of being, I'm separate from this host. So I'm going to, because I'm separate from it, I can do this, exploitation thing that I want to do with it. And it's all the forms of creation. There are no, without exception, is my experience, are going to come home. They're all going to go home because there's only one source. And no matter how separate any individual or part of this creation feels from that source of creation, it will eventually come home. And that is a process of refining and upgrading the form, the actual physical form, whether it's a human being in a physical body or whether it's a light being of some kind in some abstract kind of light body, dark light body. It's all going to come home and the body's going to reform itself to accommodate integration with totality. Yeah. So ego. You're right. That's the critical moment. You nailed it, actually, Joshua. The critical moment is that moment when the ego defines itself as somehow separate from the whole reality and not integrated with totality, but like kind of standing as its own special snowflake, standing on its own position, so to say. Yeah. And at that point, all kinds of unfortunate behaviors can be justified from that perspective. Like you gave Hitler as an example.
Yeah.
Then a person can justify all kinds of Stalin, all kinds of, absolutely, unthinkable, unspeakable wrongs committed in this world from that perspective of, well, that's not going to hurt me. I can create suffering for somebody else because I'm separate from them and I'm not going to feel that pain, right. Something like that. But that when the integration occurs, and so that brings us to the area of how do we handle the form? How do we handle the physical form? Right? Because the body is the vehicle, the body is the vessel of totality. And if there's an experience of, I'm separate from wholeness, it's going to be because somewhere in the body, your point that there is a lack of flow, which I think we could also maybe look at as where evolution gets blocked, right? Because evolution is obviously also a very flowing thing. So I'm wondering, can we dive into that a little bit of if there's a blockage, how does energy healing from your perspective work to get into the area where there's a lack of flow and recreate flow? You mentioned inviting flow, but I mean, can we look a little bit under the microscope at that? Like how exactly does the flow come? Because I would imagine different parts of a person, maybe the lack of flow is emotional or mental or in some physical organ or something. And, how does that look under different circumstances?
Well, with the soul being the governing agent, when the soul is when the soul's been healed, right? And how does the soul heal? Well, regardless of what sort of parasites are draining the life force, right? Universal law is that you, Dorothy, have 100% sovereign right over your soul's energy, no matter what is taking it.
Thank
and
you.
Being taught and teaching
yes.
people how
May
to
everybody
recall.
who's listening get this point. This is such an important point. Yes, Joshua.
And so I teach people how to recall that power. So I get rid of those mosquitoes. I teach them how to deny those in their field. It doesn't mean that they're not going to show up. It just means that rather than me going around with a fly swatter, karma is going to deal with it. And karma is going to be a much bigger swat than I could ever do. Sure. And so just refusing to allow energy that does not serve us into our field,
Right.
If love is ultimately, well, love is ultimately what drives me along with truth,
Yes.
right? You know, what was it the Tao said that wise words aren't pleasant, pleasant words aren't wise, right? And so when people are telling us a harsh truth, that can make us feel bad, but but that truth can lead to something far better. And
Yeah, well, it creates trust too. I mean,
yeah,
even if it's not the truth you wanted to hear, if it's the truth and you know it's the truth,
yeah,
then at least you can trust the messenger. You
yeah,
can say, or you can trust it. You can trust that truth itself.
yeah,
I have two questions.
yeah.
One of them is, how do you help people regain that autonomy or power over their connection?
Well, so I bring them into a deep meditation.
Mm,
I connect with their soul.
mm,
And I create a spirit of harmony. And so any sort of spirit guides, or those that are attached to them, I let them know that I'm coming from the highest levels of love and truth. So that way they aren't trying to block me. That way they know that I'm here to serve them, for a benevolent purpose. And then through the meditation, again, once the mind is the noise is quieted and the signal is there, well, it's one of those things that you feel, right?
mm,
Feeling in these meditations are 99% of it. Visualizing is 1%, right?
mhm.
And the feeling, because feeling is, what is it? The Tao that can be told is not the eternal Tao. The
Right,
name that can be named is not the eternal name, because
right,
words are clumsy. Words come
right.
from a lower vibrational space, right? Because there's a knowing, and it's understood, or it's you know thought that higher beings will just communicate through telepathy because they don't have need of words. And telepathy would be able to not just infer the word, but also the meaning, and also the
Right.
feeling,
The
and also
feeling.
everything else. So then somebody can appreciate the totality of what's going on. And then being able to help them visualize themselves, right? Which isn't all that different from, say, the Silva method, if you're familiar with that,
Mhm.
right?
A
And just
little.
being able to visualize, and that which you can hold in your mind, you can also hold in your hand.
Mhm. Beautiful. Thank you.
So,
Yeah. Okay. So that was part of it. The other part was that there's a Vedic concept known as Dharma. I don't know if you're familiar,
like the
but
life's purpose.
yes, but also that which sustains creation at a more fundamental, because there's different kinds of Dharma,
Yeah.
but fundamentally, it's that which sustains. And it's comprised of these four values: truth, compassion or love, orderliness, and the ability to know when to hold and when to let go.
Mm.
Essentially, it's they're Vedic terms that are simple Vedic terms, often to describe complicated um, Western ideas that take a lot of words. But tapas is the word there, which is sometimes interpreted as austerity, but it really means when do you let go in an appropriate manner, and what would be the boundaries and limitations of that letting go, and when do you hold? When do you hold and when do you let go? So there's that. It sounds like I just wanted to bring that up because you were talking about how for you love and truth is there, and that also there's another idea in there too, that um, the value of a thought or a feeling or an emotion is based on not so much whether it's a pleasant emotion like love or an unpleasant emotion like anger or anxiety or fear, but to what degree the individual is anchored to wholeness as they're experiencing that will determine how evolutionary it is. Because, like, the negative feelings can serve, right? Like, if, for example, fear, we know as parents that fear is an emotion that supports the ability to protect, and that without it, the protective impulse as a parent doesn't kick in as nicely. Maybe that's like pulling the arrow back on the bow that you were talking about before. You know,
Yeah,
that the
I can
negativity
see
is
that.
there if it's used, if it's aimed, if we
Hmm.
aim the arrow in a way that we're aiming toward the highest truth, toward the highest evolution, toward the highest expressions of love, ultimately to come to the surface, then even anger or frustration, my perception is that anger is used to kind of try to uncover truth that's been camouflaged, or to reestablish flow that needs to
Mm.
be established. Yeah, reestablished. reestablished, because it's a big power. Anger is like a big power, right? So it can come in and move mountains if it needs to. If it's directed in a way that it's supporting evolution, then rather than being like a negative impulse, it can actually support and help the person come into a state of grace, something like that.
Yeah. Well, these,
Your
negative
reflections.
emotions, I see them as corridors. And, because
Nice.
they're meant to get us from one place or one state to another.
Right. Right.
And if
Right.
you look at it, analogous to, say, a house,
Yeah.
right? A state could be a room, right? A state of being could be a room, and a corridor would be a hallway. Well, is it possible to live a meaningful life in a hallway in perpetuity?
Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. Which is why when we live in these states or these emotions that are only meant to be a corridor, well, we find that it actually deprives us of a meaningful life.
Right.
Anger robs the
Right.
soul.
Right.
Fear robs the soul. In fact, fear can, like you said, fear can help me be a good father to my son, but it can also rob him of a life, because the only thing he hears is no,
Right.
no,
Right.
no. And not no because I'm afraid. He hears no, you're not good enough.
Right. Right. And it's, that's that little shift, because that's the way the mind tends to take these things.
Yep.
Obviously, from your side, it's coming from love and
Yep.
the importance of a father's role to provide healthy boundaries in a child's life, which is absolutely essential for them to become successful adults. But that point where the self-identification, and that's the ego, right, holds on to, oh, I'm not good enough, I'm insufficient, I'm not able to, not making it, not cutting the mustard there, that is the foundation of, oh, I'm separate from the source of creation. And that shows or reveals or illuminates the point where wholeness needs to be reestablished. And so, my experience, so I think our discussion about the ego, coming back to that just a little bit, that the principle is that the ego itself has this potential to evolve, and that its potential to evolve is based on the integration between the sense of individuality, separate personal self, and whole self, complete totality, that eternal reality or truth, which can only be experienced. We just have a couple minutes. Is there anything you would like to say, to any last message or?
Well, I guess if this is something that resonates with you, if you're listening to this, right? I've dealt with my own child abuse, my own PTSD, chronic pains. As you can imagine, soldier doesn't really treat their body very well. And if this is something that really resonates with you, I'd be happy to talk with you, see how I can help out, how I can add value. I love to, because if nothing else, even if I'm not the right person to take you through a spiritual healing, I can likely point you in a place where there's good resources to be able to help you out. And you can reach out to me at freemefrompains.com. And there's an easy way to go ahead and schedule a healing plan. But outside of that, be gentle with yourself, right? There's enough people that are gonna that are be more than happy to dump all over you. Don't be one of them, right? And doesn't mean that you need to go through and la land and not take anything seriously, or just and just say, well, life is about love, and so I'm just going to believe everything. Just be kind to yourself. Be gentle to yourself, and any place in which you feel that you're struggling, approach it from a place of curiosity. Hey, why am I feeling this? Not, hey, I shouldn't be feeling this. Well, why not? Right? Not, oh, I'm bad for feeling this. Well, then you're gonna, your body can't help but listen to you. Right? Be careful how you talk to yourself, because your body can't help but to listen. And so approach yourself with compassionate curiosity, and ask yourself better questions. Questions are the steering wheel of the mind. And as we ask questions, well, we're going to look in the direction of that question. And most people say, why is this happening to me? Well, there's Dr. James Gates, a famous physicist out of, I believe it's University of Maryland. He looks into fractal patterns, and buried deep within fractal patterns, he finds computer code. And not just any computer code, but code very, very similar to a search engine. Well, that's interesting. Well, that really
so
coincides.
Interesting.
That coincides with a lot of the law of attraction, right? And as anyone who's ever done a Google search, you have a bad question, you're gonna get some bad answers. Right. Why does this always happen to me? Oh, here's why. Or here's also why. There's also why. Why am I such an idiot? Oh, here's why. Here's also why. And so learn to ask yourself better questions. Hey, why am I feeling this way?
Mm,
What does this have to tell me? How can I use this in order to benefit my life?
mm,
And as we were talking about with the ego is part of the me.
right.
The greater is the I am.
Mm.
And that doesn't mean that we need to transcend and, like you said, divorce ourselves of a name and being like, I am,
Sorry.
have chimes on our fingers and, have a chorus of angels everywhere we go, which would certainly be kind of amusing. Um, but to understand that if you can find that I am, well, then you can surrender to it, but then you can also have so much certainty where when not to move, um, in yourself, because the quality of a person's life really amounts to the amount of uncertainty that they can comfortably deal with.
Right. Oh, beautifully put. Yes, yes, yes. Yes, 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 yes. Yes, so beautiful. Thank you, Joshua.
You're welcome.
Amazing, amazing. Thank you for
Oh,
taking the time out of your day to
yeah, my
spend it
pleasure.
with me and to have this lovely deep dive
Yeah.
into the mechanics of energy healing and how we understand it and how an individual can empower themselves too to
Mm,
really take control of their lives and really grow into the very best that they can possibly grow into their full potential,
yeah,
basically. So
100%.
I really appreciate it that you and I are on the same team, that we're working in this field both
Yeah,
at the same time in history and together and at this very kind of dynamic, extremely dynamic and transformational
extremely.
time in history. It's a really I feel that there's a greater need today than there has been maybe ever for people to be able to come into a kind of a state of grace and autonomous control over their own experience. And so I really appreciate that you're providing that for people. Thank you so much.
Oh,
Thank
my
you for the
pleasure. My
lovely
pleasure.
summit. And I hope everybody will get a chance to go check out Joshua's website and find out more about him. And so, anyway, thank you all so much. And we'll look forward to seeing you again soon.
Oh, thank you so much.
Bye.